Thank you.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you everyone for joining us and for agreeing to help shepherd this 2-year service agreement to bring the NTRR back online and to align it with FITBR. We're very excited about this project getting started. Our agenda for today is pretty straightforward. We thought we would start with just brief introductions, give an overview of this 2-year project, and also a little history of the repository. We'll also go through the scope of work for the service agreement, the role of this executive steering committee, and also we'd like to talk with you all about how what we propose in terms of forming the Common Data Elements Committee. And then we'll touch base with Matt about the NIH CCRP timeline for bringing the repository back online, talk a little bit about our project management strategy, and then have discussion of any other items. And like I said, please feel free to ask questions or interject at any time. Should we do introductions, or given the people that are on the phone right now, I think we all pretty well know each other? Do you all agree with that?
Fine with me.
Yeah, I think we're good to move on.
Okay. You see here on the list that we do have a to be hired, or not to be hired, but to be determined for a representative from NHLBI. JB, is that something that you'll be working on?
Yes, that's Captain Polk and I can work on that, and we'll be in touch if we're able to get that. Okay.
Okay. And then, as I said, Dr. Stein, unfortunately, is having a busy day on call, so she may not be able to make it, but I will catch up with her next week. And then you all know all of us here from Center, myself, Pam, and Monica will all be very involved with this project. So in terms of the project—
Excuse me, I have a question. This is JB. Regarding Dr. Stein. I saw the emails today. She's at University of Maryland. Is that her clinical appointment, but she works with you guys at Center? Like, is she?
She's full-time at University of Maryland, but she's been very involved with us through our scientific advisory committee. And she actually led that small ad hoc committee that we talked about when we met with you all at MHSRS, where we have representatives from the multi-institutional trial committees of all the major trauma organizations. And they convened on their own because they were interested in in developing common data elements and helping shepherd the next iteration of the repository. So she's been pretty involved and read in on this project.
Thank you.
You bet. So I guess more so for Matt. This project is, of course, to integrate the National Trauma Research Repository into the FITBR information system. We are planning to, of course, use some consensus, developing strategies in terms of identifying the common data elements that would be most appropriate for trauma studies, aligning those with FITBR's common data elements, and also establishing the processes for submitting new trauma data to the repository once it is back online, and then the policies and procedures for requesting data moving forward once the repository is operable.
So I don't know if this is a good time to jump in, or maybe at the end of the. Okay, I'll jump in.
Please go ahead.
It's best to jump in at the end.
Either is fine. Please go ahead.
Okay, so I think there might be a slight kind of nuance to address, is that it was my understanding is that what essentially we'll be working very closely with you on building a public part of NTRR, and that when you hit the login button, essentially it's going to take you to Fitbur and allow to use that repository as actually the storage of data. And we're going to add additional functionality to the system to help support filtering so that you can just see your particular studies of interest versus Fitbur, or that so you could see all of them. So is that essentially the same view that you're having, or that you have?
Yes, that is our understanding.
Okay.
Captain Pope, would you like to add to that? Or JB?
Sure. So yeah, I think, there's kind of two things here. One is kind of what is the intended end state for the repository, and then what is the scope of this contract. So ultimately, the intent for NTRR is to integrate NTRR with Fitbur so that they are essentially one. On the back end, they will be one system. And on the front end, we talked about it a lot, and what I think we've come up with is that it will be kind of two sister systems with very similar processes, but outward facing. It'll be there'll be an NTRR website that at the bottom says in collaboration with Fitbur, and the Fitbur website will say in collaboration with, but they're both going to be DoD NIH supported Fitbur endeavors. It'll just be the NTRR outwardly facing is kind of a sister program. Once things get past that initial outward facing wall, though, things will all be the same. The Fitbur ops team will be handling processing of the data to get it into the repository, and agreements and all that kind of thing. The NIH informatics folks will be the back end support of it. The scope of this contract is really to get from the initial envisioned state of things, and what was initially set up with Center and what has been archived, as well as the other studies that Fitbur or that Center has access to. Get that stuff ready to put into NTRR and put into NTRR. Use Center's capabilities as an organization that brings together the trauma community to establish the CDEs, and to look at all of the Fitbur processes with us and figure out what things do we need to adjust for the trauma community so that we have either revised Fitbur instruments or synonymous instruments for the Fitbur team. Then I think where there is potential to, as part of this effort, to think about is, and so the end state will be, that NTR exists as this Fitbur-like project within NIH and supported by DoD, where I think that there is room at following this contract to think about is what potentially would Center's enduring role be, if there is one. I can see, people struggle sometimes getting things into Fitbur, planning a study that's compatible with Fitbur, and that's just in the TBI world, let alone the trauma world, which is an even wider aperture. And so I think that there probably, or certainly may be a role for Center in the future to assist the government in kind of that stakeholder engagement and, shaping of studies so that they can, be maximally compatible with this resource, things like that. And so I think, there's the scope of this project, and then I think there's some discussion that we can all have about potentially it wouldn't be a huge role, right? But it would be, but there may be opportunities for center to have a more enduring role in helping to recruit studies, helping PIs get them, submission ready, things like that, that we can certainly explore as we move through this contract. So that's how I envision it. The context of this is really center helping the government, with all of everything that needs to happen to stand up this parallel capability. But I think, there's things we can talk about for the future as well. Is that different from everyone's understanding, or is that in concert with how center understands?
That's our understanding. Yes, sir.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. Then any other, and as I look at kind of this list, the first one is clearly center, the second one is center. As we start getting down to these second three, it's center helping the FITBUR team, figure out what their new process should be, how we lay this into the existing FITBUR processes.
Right. So yes, this slide is very much centered on no pun intended, but focused on the work that we'll be doing in this first phase. And we would definitely be interested in the longer term, providing some sort of like investigator support, so that folks can get the most out of the resource, once it's up and running. So we'd certainly be interested in talking about that at some point. So the next slide we have, I guess for the folks on this call, all of us have lived some part of this, and Matt goes back to almost the beginning. But just as a recap, we actually started talking with the DoD about this need for a repository way back in 2012. Then we requested $5 million in the FY 2014 federal budget. And then in 2015, we received a grant for $4.6 million for a couple of studies and the development of the repository. And so then we had this process. We had an executive committee at that time. Matt was actually, I don't know if you were formally a formal member, but I know you were involved with us in the early days quite a bit. We put the project out for bid. We ended up selecting Sapient and the BRICS platform, and they basically built the NTRR for us, which was, as Monica would say, it was about 80% a fit with BRICS as it existed at that time, and there was about 20% customization. And so we had the project online. We developed what we're calling now the version 1 of our core data elements. And launched in 2018, June of 2018. We did some importing of some initial legacy studies and built out, data elements for those studies. And we were able to make this $2 million research award. We stretched that out until March of 2021. At that time, we had expended all of the funds for the hosting of the repository, and so we basically shelved it, took it offline, working with Allison Garcia. Sorry, going the wrong way. So now we'll talk a little bit more in detail about Center's scope of work for this 2-year engagement. And Pam is going to be it is the NTRR project manager and the point of contact. And so she'll walk you through these slides.
Thanks, Michelle. So we pulled this out of the non-cost proposal of all the steps that we are going to do over the next 2 years. So the first thing, of course, was to establish this committee, which we have done. The next, and we'll talk about this a little bit later today, is establishing the CDE steering committee, and there are some expectations for that that were in the non-cost proposal. So we'll talk about that. We will hold one in-person meeting of that CDE steering committee about 6 months in. In the meantime, we'll be establishing work groups to develop and validate the CDEs, and those work groups will be decided by the CDE steering committee with probably input from you all. Then we'll prepare to integrate the legacy. As Captain Polk said, we're not actually going to integrate them, but we're preparing all these to integrate, and we'll get that through this scope of work. We'll develop the plan to use the legacy study data. We'll develop policies and procedures around that in coordination with FIPR. And then, of course, all of the routine reporting, the quarterly reports, the annual reports, and at the end, sharing our findings. So that's what we understand the scope of work to be for Center. Are there any questions about that?
This is JB. There is, I think, some travel involved beyond the meeting 6 to 9 months. At a DOD meeting, not sure. Was that captured if you guys are going to present findings? I think
Yes.
that's one of your procedurals.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes, sharing the findings. Sorry, that wasn't a very specific bullet, but
Yeah.
at appropriate meetings. And then the next slide, Michelle, is just a Gantt chart that actually Monica built out showing kind of how this work filters across the 2 years of the contract. So just basically everything I said here, you'll see a lot of concurrent things happening concurrently. But we do intend to get all of this done within the 2-year period.
Are your thoughts as far as CDE meetings that, separate meetings or trying to align with, the existing trauma meetings, or have you thought that far about anything?
I think in the scope, in the non-cost proposal, there are quarterly meetings that are virtual, correct, Michelle? And then one.
That's correct.
meeting- Yeah.
And we were thinking that we would have the in-person meeting actually here in San Antonio. We hadn't planned to try to add it to an existing meeting because of the feedback that we get from folks that it's already hard enough to get away for those days for those meetings, and then to try to add another day and a half on is problematic. But of course, we're open to considering if you think that would work better, we could certainly look at that.
So, just looking at your timeline, I agree, it's hard to add on to things. It may be worth trying to do like a kickoff meeting of the steering committee at AAST. That's in September, and probably almost everyone will be there. It may be worth trying to do that.
Well, I think we will be having the first meeting, which will be virtual within the first quarter, I believe is how it's scheduled in the scope of work. But certainly we could try to have an in-person meeting. It seems like these days that they're leaving that Thursday afternoon open for like extra sessions. And so that might be something that we could look at doing.
Yeah, certainly not a requirement, but it might be useful to get folks together in a few months. But okay, no, that Gantt chart definitely makes sense.
I did have a question with respect to the data element development of the steering committee. Who do you feel is going to lead that kind of effort? Is that coming from your group, and we provide a curation support for that?
In terms of like
So
creating what we would call version 2 of our common data elements, is that what you're asking?
correct. So first of all, you have conduct quarterly CDE meetings. Who's going to lead those meetings? Who's going to be the subject matter expert in those for those data elements? I know I've at the moment have scheduled 25% of my CDE curator to support the effort, but not to lead it.
Oh, I understand. Yes, we will lead the meeting, definitely. And we think, and we actually want to talk with you all about this today. What we're proposing in terms of the members of that committee, the subject matter experts, is that we would like to go to our 5 core member organizations. So East, AAST, ACS, COT, Western Trauma, and ABA, and invite the presidents, is what we're proposing, to appoint representatives that can serve on this committee for a 2-year period. So that they may want to pick their vice chair of their multi-institutional trials committee, for example, because that person would be involved hopefully with their committee for the next 2 years. But that was what we were thinking. And that group will look a lot like that ad hoc committee I referred to early on when you asked about Dr. Stein. That seems to have worked pretty well thus far. And we definitely have people who are interested, like John Cull representing East, and others who've served on that committee and would like to be involved in the CDE committee as well.
Yeah, so I certainly think that makes sense. I do think, and I don't know if you want to, is that the next slide?
It's let's just jump to it. It's just a few, here we go. Okay. So this is basically what I just said. Yeah.
Yeah, so I do think that makes sense. I think there are probably some people that we're going to need to add. Like, I think that as a core group, that makes total sense. I think there's some governmental representation that's going to need to be on the committee, from our program, from JTS, from BARDA. We may want to involve them, as well as from NIH.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is we may want to think about the organizations. I think those organizations make perfect sense, but we may want to think about if we need to cast a slightly wider net, that includes AABB, they may or may not be the right people. I'm just trying to think. There's been a lot of people that have been working on, particularly with blood products, what the appropriate endpoints are, and so I think we may need to think a little bit there. Either some specific SMEs that we involve, that have done a lot of work in looking at this, or potentially organizations, but we may need to add a few other kind of SME folks to the group as well.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I just wanted to include NIH and the FITBUR CD curator needs to be part of the committee.
Sure. Okay, so we'll begin to walk through this process, and loop back with you all about the other SMEs that we want to have at the table. As I mentioned, I think the goal, as was described in the statement of work, was that we at least have our first meeting with the group within the first 3 months of this project. So that's our next thing to work on.
So I think the other thing that might be important to chat about, and maybe we'll get to this, but in regards to the kind of the CDE, is, I'm not sure if we have a good, and this is something that, is also within FITBUR undergoing some adjustment, but we probably are going to need to define, what studies actually do we want in the repository? What is this? What is trauma? But the other thing that we've been working on, and Matt, you may be better able to speak to this, but there really are going to be 2 parts of the repository. So there's the CDE based part that will be prospective data that from studies that align well to the CDEs. But the other thing that we're working on expanding within FITBR and consequently within NTRR as we build it is what right now is, and I don't know if there's plans to change it, but it's the what was called the meta repository, and was initially established to put, you know, secondary data sets from meta-analysis, things like that into it. As we've looked at it and looked at the lessons learned from FITBR, in that, you know, unless something goes perfectly and does all of the alignment up front, trying to shove the round peg into the square hole is very challenging. But there are still a lot of studies that are of value. And so what we are also working on is building out this other kind of, you know, bucket repository where studies data sets can go into those, not necessarily be fully synchronized with the CDE part of the repository, but then, you know, they're appropriately indexed so that if someone wants to use them, if someone wants to combine them, it puts the burden of doing that work on the performer, but they're still accessible. And so that's, in the future, we envision a lot more studies going into that, and a lot of the studies that didn't meet the ultra specific criteria for being able to go into the main FITBR database, they can go into this part of it and still be useful. And so I think we're going to have a lot in trauma that is that way, because, you know, if a study is, you know, looking at, you know, the preventable death studies, you know, we're not going to have CDEs to align to a lot of that stuff when we start talking about autopsy data and other things, and the specific endpoints within those studies. And so whereas in this other repository they would fit and be of utility to folks. So I think that's something that also needs to kind of be appreciated, is we're not just talking about the, you know, very formal prospective studies that exactly match the CDEs. Matt, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Nope, you're exactly right. To go into the database, you need the CDEs, and it's primarily for prospective studies, and the retrospective studies will go into that meta study repository. That is the metadata will be searchable, but not the actual data. But there are studies that are still valuable, but they'll not be within the query tool.
Well, and I think, you know, I think that the other aspect of that is, particularly in this space, there's probably I would envision that there will be a lot of prospective studies probably that go into that repository as well, that just don't fit the database mold as well. So
Yes, and part of our work on this agreement is to develop some guidelines for assessing what studies make sense to bring in, you know, that, like, as you were describing, they're evaluating their utility, even if they didn't use, you know, because they're legacy studies. And so that's part of the work that we're planning to perform for this. Monica, did you want to say anything about that?
No, ma'am, I think it's been covered. Well, other than we will do an analysis and assessment of how best to evaluate the legacy study and present it to the committee for consideration before we move through evaluating all of the studies that are legacy, having been supported by the repository or by center, and those that have been conducted by the multi-institutional trauma centers from all the other organizations. They have probably about 40 closed studies that we'd like to at least look at for potential inclusion.
Great, thank you. So we skipped over, we'll just quickly back to the role of this committee. The way it was described in our non-cost proposal was that the executive committee will just provide general overall direction for the project, oversee the work that is going on at center as well as at NIH CIT. And then they will have the final stamp of approval and review over the CDE committee work products. Anyone have anything to add or questions about that?
No, I think that makes sense. And just so you understand kind of the synergies, and we'll have to, we'll probably have to have some chats about, and I think one of the things within this contract is looking at, governance processes and things like that. But this very closely aligns to the FITBR governance. The overarching governance structure of FITBR currently is our program, NIH-CIT and NINDS. And so they, there's synergies there in that it's the same same three people.
Okay. So Matt, would you mind talking us through, I think more for those of us at Center that don't have visibility into the work that you've got planned on your end for NTRR. Could you just kind of give us an idea of what your work plan looks like in terms of bringing the repository back online?
Right. So we would, I think, start out by working with you very closely on developing the public website of NTRR. And so that would be taking some of the information that has been previously developed, but it's probably out of date now, needs updating and refinement, and work with you where you would be providing your team would be providing the subject matter expertise, and we would actually implement the web pages, help you update the documents, and get that up and going. So I think that's the first step. The other kind of that can happen in parallel with with your Gantt chart is also we were going to provide our CDE curator 25% of her time, and she's done extensive amounts of work with the FITBR data elements, and she would be a great person to have as part of that team because she can harmonize or reuse the data elements that have already been developed for FITBR, and to make sure that we don't reinvent the wheel. And then we also have, I think, 200 plus data elements that were out of NTRR that we may need updating and or harmonization. The third part, we're going to also work on updating the meta study repository significantly to improve the uploading and downloading of files from there, improve performance, be able to adjust how much memory or storage space each of the studies would get, improve the searching across those studies. Those are kind of the major things. There's some additional user interface updates and improvements. From an overall perspective, we also wanted to look at improving the system so that you can identify who has which accounts. Are they from CNTR program? And if you log into the system from CNT or NTRR, I'm using those interchangeably. I might not supposed to, but when you log in from that website, you would only see your particular studies. But we also have to have the mechanism that they can then all see all of FITBR studies and be able to control who has also access to which studies within the system, which user has access to which studies. So there's some updates to that we need to do. I know there's a few more. I think those were the major bullet points that we wanted to support.
Great. We thought we'd spend just a little bit of time on some kind of housekeeping things in terms of how this group was going to do its work and what we're planning on doing on the back end and reporting out to you all when we have our regular meetings. Pam, would you like to go through these couple of slides?
Sure. So the very first thing I believe is just deciding on the platform. So, we use Zoom, but we understand that that's not easy for the military side, would you prefer that we set these meetings up in Microsoft Teams?
This is fine with me on my phone. I have Zoom on the government phone, so it's no problem. It's just sharing. If we need to share things for you guys to see, it's kind of hard to share on the phone
Right.
on our laptop. But Captain Polk, do you have any preference on these? Maybe muted.
I'm having trouble seeing it, but is this Zoom? Is this the government version of Zoom, or is this the regular version of
This
Zoom?
is regular Zoom that center.
Yeah, so government Zoom is much easier for us because we can use our government computers. I would say if not, Teams would probably work better. And
we wouldn't have access to government Zoom, is that right? That's just for.
so it's a different license that meets the government IT requirements.
Okay.
The other thing is, I mean, if it's easier, once we have like a meeting schedule, we could also generate the meeting invites, which sometimes is easier.
Okay, that is a good possibility then, and the only reason I even say that is because Teams sometimes is wonky on our end. We've had issues with it, but I like that solution for the meeting invitation to come from JB's office or one of your support people, and that way we'd be sure that it works for everybody.
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay. Great. The next slide, I think we're just talking. Oh, so what we've decided to do is set this up in a program called Microsoft Planner, which this is just a screenshot that I took where we have been working on just a way to manage all the work across time and across all the different groups that will be involved, that will be touching it. So we've got this group, we've got a bucket for this group, for the CDE committee, for the work groups that will be established, and then for overall project tasks like developing the assessment framework and assessing legacy studies against that framework, etc. So this is how we will be managing the project on our end. We'll keep up with it. It's great. It generates generates Gantt charts. It reminds us. It brings in everybody on our team. We, in addition to Michelle, Monica, and myself, we have two research associates here at Center, Nick Medrano and Ashley Moreno, who will be helping do some technical work on the back end of the CDE. So we will keep it moving with this tool. Just sharing that all with you. And then the last bit of housekeeping is establishing a standing monthly meeting time. And we know that is difficult with schedules being what they are, but thinking about a typical day of the week and time of day that might be generally open, particularly for you, Dr. Polk, could we get kind of a standard time that we could set up and of course modify, if need be, but is that something we could figure out today?
Yeah, we should be able to figure something out.
Okay.
For consistency.
Is that something we should work with your admin on, Dr. Polk?
I would say let's work with JB.
Okay.
I think we find a time that works for the majority of people, and we'll figure it out. It may take a little bit of offline coordination, but yeah, we can definitely, that can be a in the next week solidifying recurring meeting time.
Okay. And we'll make sure that we record each one, which is a really good idea, just to keep it for people who are unable to attend. I think that's it for housekeeping.
It is. And so we thought we would just use the remainder of the time if necessary. If there are other things that we haven't touched on that should be on the table for this this executive committee. Captain Polk, did you have anything else?
Michelle, also,
No,
Dr. Umo just joined.
Yes, hi everyone. Sorry, I'm late. I was coming from another meeting. I just have a quick question. Are you, Pam, are you going to be able to send these slides out that you went over today? Okay.
Yes, I will send them out. We also are recording it, so I can send you both.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I think Matt, I'm sorry, I think I jumped in front of you. I think you're going to say something.
Oh, no problem. I did have a quick question with respect to kicking off the web development meeting. When did you all want to start that process?
We're ready whenever your team is ready.
Okay. Okay. So let me get back to my team and we'll be in contact. Okay.
That would be great. And in the meantime, we are refamiliarizing ourselves with Bitburger. Of course, we spent a lot of time when we were, considering the product way back when, but we've been refamiliarizing ourselves with your processes and your policies and some of your training webinars. So we are getting back up to speed on how you all do business there.
Right. And I think Allison Garcia is the program manager for the Sapient contract that works with us. I think she also provided access to the Box site with
Yes.
all the legacy information. So that'll be a good place also to take where we were before and start to integrate that into where we want to be. But I think we should look at it as the web pages can be kind of brand new and updated to where you want them to be, I guess.
Yeah, and I
That'd be
think the other thing from a planning perspective, and JB and I'll chat about it, but what we'll work on doing is looking at the Gantt chart that you have, but then also kind of creating a larger version that includes the government tasks that need to happen. We've had some conversations about that, and in terms of modifying all the things that need to be modified and other things. And so we'll work, JB, and we'll work with NIH to try and build out kind of a master program schedule as well.
We'd be happy to help with that. We already have all of our tasks. So if you have tasks and you want to just, once you've determined what you think those timeframes look like, and you just want to share those with us, same with you, Matt, we could layer all of that into what we have and create that master document if that's easier for folks.
Okay, great.
Well, I think that's everything we have for today.
Yep, I'm good.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. We'll be
Thanks,
sending out
everyone.
the slides and the link to the recording. And
All right.
And also
Take care.
from the meeting, you'll send out in a couple of weeks, I think, right? Within a couple of weeks.
The minutes, yep.
Yep.
Probably a couple of days. So I'll send
Okay.
all that at once.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.